Can you believe how the American presidential national conventions have evolved over the decades? These conventions have played a pivotal role in shaping the American political landscape for years, reflecting changes in both parties and the nation, from the early, sometimes chaotic beginnings to the highly organized media events they are today. The conventions have always offered a fascinating glimpse into the American political history. Join us as we take a deep dive through some of the most important conventions in America's history. The Democratic Party held its first convention in Baltimore. The early conventions were less formal affairs, often categorized by contentious debates and maneuvering behind closed doors. The 1832 convention was notably where Andrew Jackson was renominated for president. In 1844, the Democratic Convention in Baltimore was infamous for its intense factionalization and drama. James K. Polk emerged as a nominee after multiple ballots, showcasing the often unpredictable nature of the early conventions. As you can probably already tell through our going through the early history of the Democratic National Conventions, that these are very different than today's. Today's, we all know who the established primary winner is and who will be the next presidential candidate for either party. Back then, that was not the case. Sometimes there was not even a front runner going into the final days of these conventions, and would lead to heavy debates, arguments, and factions within political parties. The Republicans held their first convention in Philadelphia, where they nominated John C. Fremont as their candidate in 1856. This was a significant moment as the Republican Party was just a few years old. They were becoming a political force in America, challenging the established Democratic dominance. In 1860, the Republican Convention in Chicago was one of the most dramatic in history. Abraham Lincoln emerged as the nominee after multiple ballots and intense negotiations. His nomination was a turning point in American politics, leading to his eventual election as President of the United States, and then, subsequently, the Civil War. It wouldn't be until we hit the 1900s that we saw the more established, more media-esque events that we know today, where beloved candidates by the media were already covered and already named primary winners, where they were just accepting the nomination, whereas back in the day, in the 1800s, it was more of establishing who the presidential candidate would be for that party. The 1960 Democratic Convention was considered to be one of the most memorable in history. This is when John F. Kennedy gave his acceptance speech and his selection of LBJ as his running mate. This set the stage for his highly impactful presidency. This convention also highlighting the growing influence that media played in politics. The media adored JFK. They loved his policy and they loved his personality, and his coverage was high. The media impacted JFK's election into the presidential campaigns just as much as they did for the Democratic Convention. The 1968 convention for the Democrats was in Chicago, and it was marked by significant protests and unrest. The Democratic National Convention became a symbol of the political and social turmoil of the era, with clashes between protesters and police over the Vietnam War and other social issues plaguing the country. This was very impactful and significant, as the Democratic Party seemed to be lost during this time period with the losing of JFK from his assassination. Due to the infighting in the Democratic Party during this convention, it would end up leading to Richard Nixon winning the presidency, as well as George Wallace, a third-party candidate, even gaining votes in the South. The 1984 Republican Convention in Dallas was notable for Ronald Reagan's re-election campaign. The convention was a showcase of Reagan's charismatic leadership and solidified his position as a dominant figure in American politics. The Morning in America theme resonated very strongly with voters, and it was very impactful for those watching. Very similar with JFK in the 60s, Reagan's charismatic personality was a driving force behind his nomination and his acceptance. The media adored the former actor and oftentimes loved to do interviews with him and have different interactions. The coverage of him was very significant and painted him as a true winner and a leader in the United States. The 2000 convention in Philadelphia was significant due to George W. Bush winning the nomination. He would dominate in the primary polls against John McCain. However, Senator McCain had very different thoughts and feelings of the direction of the country. That being said, George W. Bush would end up being the candidate and going on to serve 2 terms as President of the United States. The Republican National Convention in Cleveland in 2016 was a landmark event due to Donald Trump's rise to the presidency. Trump's unconventional campaign and rhetoric were on full display, and his nomination was dramatic and a departure from the traditional Republican norms. The convention was highlighted by deep divisions within the Republican Party. The 2020 Democratic National Convention, which was held virtually due to COVID-19, was a historic and unusual event. Joe Biden's nomination as Democratic candidate was overshadowed by the pandemic, leading to a convention that was much more subdued and focused on digital engagement. This brings us to 2024. The Republicans have already had the national convention, with Donald Trump announcing J.D. Vance as his vice president. This convention was significant for several reasons. The first, it was the first time in many years that a candidate for president who had lost had come back and won the primary once again. It was also significant as it came only weeks after Donald Trump had an assassination attempt on his life. The Democratic National Convention, which is currently going on, also has had significant historical impact. It's the first time that a presidential candidate has stepped down for the vice president to take the nomination, rather than primaries taking place, with President Biden stepping down and Vice President Kamala Harris taking his place for the spot of the ticket. Many have spoken out against this as the primaries did not occur, but Kamala Harris and her team has done a fantastic job with their marketing and engagement to bring a youth movement for the Democratic Party to this national convention. There is no doubt the importance of these national conventions for both political parties. Going forward, there should be more excitement leading into the November elections. Who do you think will be the next president of the United States? We'd love to hear from all of you. Please write it in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. And again, we appreciate all of you. Thank you.